and welcome to the show this week. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, of course, this coming week, on Tuesday, in fact, hugely important election in the US. So I'm delighted to be joined now by Steve Edginton, who is, well, he's first of all been on our channel quite a few times, but he is now the US correspondent for GB News. Thank you very much for joining us, Steve. Thank you. Where are you actually based now? Are you based in Washington or New York?
In Washington, DC, yeah.
In Washington. In at the deep end, if you like, a few people have said, I think not least for Elon Musk, that this coming election is the most important of our lifetime, you know, if not actually since maybe the Second World War. Would you go along with that?
Well, every election cycle, this is a claim that is made. And I think you have to assess it through an historical lens. I think there have been a lot of important elections since the Second World War. I think the 1964 election, probably one of the most pivotal in American history, the election of Lyndon Johnson, and the huge transformation of America that he enabled. And by the way, people probably think, oh, I'm thinking of the Civil Rights Act, which is obviously incredibly important, but also his immigration reform, which essentially opened up America's borders after a long immigration moratorium. His Great Society, his welfare reforms accelerated the New Deal. So I think, look, there's been lots of important elections. 1964 is one of them. 2016, incredibly important. But, you know, you look at 2012, maybe that wasn't so important, 2004. Because it seems like the last 20 years before Donald Trump, there was this political consensus in America. And a bit like in Britain, you have a kind of uniparty which may fiddle around the edges, may disagree on some issues. I think in the States, the difference between the two major parties is more profound, particularly on social issues. But when it comes to foreign policy, there has been a consensus, a kind of globalist, liberal economic consensus. And I think that this election in 2024 is important because there is a major divide between the two parties, perhaps not on some issues like Israel, but on major issues facing the United States and the world. Donald Trump and Kamala Harris take very, very different positions. And I think Americans have to look at this and decide whether they want 4 more years of the Biden-Harris legacy or whether they want another term of Donald Trump. And I think it's interesting to see whether this second term from Trump will be different from his first. Economically, a lot of Americans say they feel better off, or they felt better off when Trump was president in 2016 to 2019, excluding the pandemic. But I think the question many conservatives are asking is, has Donald Trump learned the lessons from his first term, which saw some successes, but also some failures? So yes, I think this election is very important for so many reasons. We can talk about some of them, not least election integrity, the way the Democrats have weaponized the DOJ against their political opponents. And I think Donald Trump is radically different to Kamala Harris in so many ways.
Do you think that he is radically different from the Trump of 2016?
I don't know. It's difficult to tell. I think he has changed. In 2016, I mean, he even admits this on the recent Joe Rogan podcast that he did. Yeah. He didn't know anyone in Washington. He didn't know who to appoint to these thousands of positions that he's responsible for. And I think he did appoint some pretty bad figures, you know, people who were undermining him, people who didn't support his rhetoric, particularly on things like foreign policy, immigration, you know, his more populist nationalist perspective on economics. He appointed all sorts of people who were leaking against him and who have now come out against him. And, you know, they say things like he's Hitler and he's fascist and so on. So has he learned the lessons there? Hopefully he has. And, you know, the people around him at the moment in the Trump campaign, I think he's got some pretty good people. Look at J.D. Vance. I think that was a great appointment as his vice presidential nominee. So first of all, I think he's learned lessons. I suspect he has learned lessons from.
He sort of appears to be a more actually a more sympathetic character. I mean, that's looking at the Joe Rogan interview. Well, if you can find it, because it's sort of been hidden, it seems. But he appears to be. He seems to have toned down certain aspects of his rhetoric, at least. He's a more reassuring character. Steve, what do you make? I mean, obviously you follow politics here in America and in Britain, have done for a long time. But what is your general view of the caliber of this election? I mean, in terms of the debates, in terms of the general level, if you like, of discourse. Does it show a kind of country that's basically declined?
I think it's been a mixed bag, this election campaign. So much. I was in a Kamala Harris rally last week in Atlanta, Georgia, and I was focusing on what the speakers were saying. They get various speakers, Obama, some documentary filmmaker, Bruce Springsteen, they get these celebrities. I think Sam Jackson was there, and obviously Kamala herself. And it's interesting to analyze what both parties are saying. And the Democrats are obsessed with, for example, Project 2025, which is this campaign run by the Heritage Foundation. They do it every election cycle, but this time it's sort of like a manifesto that they put together for the next Republican president that they can use, they can adopt. It's kind of like a plan for government and for governance. And the Democrats weaponize this to say that Trump is going to ban abortion and do all of these very socially conservative things, which are unpopular generally with the American public. And Trump has disassociated himself from Project 2025 and some of the weirder aspects of that, of that document. So I think there's been an odd obsession from the Democrats on things that, frankly, are very suspicious. I mean, I think there's a few other examples. They say that Trump admires Hitler. Whether that's true or not, I think could be cast in doubt. They say that Trump said there were fine people on both sides of this neo-Nazi rally in Charlottesville. He never said that. He explicitly said that he wasn't talking about neo-Nazis. So there's a huge focus from the Democrats and from their allies in the media on these issues that seem pretty irrelevant to the American public, whether it's J.D. Vance being weird, or, as I said, Project 2025. So in that sense, the discourse has been pretty depressing. The campaign has been, I think, it's just been so much focus on things that just aren't substantive. Yes. And Kamala herself hasn't really focused on policy until the latter half of the campaign. She was more of what they call a vibes candidate. They're obsessed with, the Democrats talking about joy all the time. And she's this brat figure, this in reference to this pop musician. So there's been lots of focus on Kamala herself and not so much on policy, which is fairly depressing. But then again, on the other side of things, you watch some of the debates, the debate between Joe Biden, Donald Trump, the debate between Kamala Harris, Trump, the debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. And actually, there was substantive policy discussions. It was actually, I think, fairly healthy. If you compare those debates to some of the debates in Britain, I'm actually pretty impressed with the kind of detail, the knowledge from both sides. And I think there has been some really interesting, substantive discussions. In the liberal media, well, actually in the media in general in America, it does seem like a lot of screaming, a lot of screeching, a lot of desperation for clicks. For example, the last week has been dominated by this idea that Trump is a fascist. His supporters are a bunch of Nazis. I mean, it's just absurd. In my mind, it's just absurd. And it's actually insulting, not only to people who support Trump, and you saw Biden's comments recently calling Trump supporters garbage.
Absolutely.
But also it's insulting to, the people who died in World War II. I mean, Trump has nothing to do with Hitler. But again, I was interviewing these Kamala supporters at that rally last week, and they're convinced he's Hitler. They're absolutely convinced he's a fascist. They listen to CNN and they think, this guy, he is akin to Hitler. And I think their historical knowledge is shallow at best. And when I asked, I always followed up with this question, is Trump Hitler? Yes, he's Hitler. And I said, well, if Trump is Hitler, do you think that Kamala Harris, as vice president, should certify the election results if Trump wins? That's her constitutional role to do that. It's famously what Mike Pence refused to listen to Trump. He did certify the
Yeah.
election results in 2020. So I asked, if Trump is Hitler, should she do that? Should she essentially enable him to be president? Because surely you want to do everything you can to stop the next Hitler. And none of them said that she should. They all said, she must certify the results. So I don't know whether they really believe this. I think it does seem like
No.
a rhetorical device.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's been a bit of a mixed bag in terms of policy discussions and so on in the campaign.
Do you know, you mentioned there about abortion. I mean, I remember that when Roe v. Wade, which was the famous, court decision about abortion, when that was reversed for the states, I might add, I can't remember, a couple of years ago now, but I remember at the time people thinking, well, that's it. That's the election sewn up, because this is such a big thing. But actually, has it featured largely in this campaign?
It has on the Democrat side. I think
Yeah.
it is the one thing that is keeping Kamala Harris competitive in this race, because there is no doubt she is an incredibly weak candidate. She did very badly in the 2019 Democratic primaries. She didn't even win a primary. She dropped out. She got destroyed in this debate with Tulsi Gabbard. And look, she's politically, she doesn't have much experience. She was a district attorney in California. And essentially, Biden said he wanted a black woman. I think there's a lot to say that she's a DEI hire. Certainly she's criticized for that. So she's a weak candidate, and they've just had 4 years of, fairly weak economy in America. Everything should be going well for the Republicans. If this was a typical election cycle, I think the Republicans would win, do very well. But the issue of abortion keeps Democrats in these races. They won, but they did very well in 2022 in the midterms because of abortion.
Yeah.
And, this obsession of what they call reproductive rights, it is driving women to the Democrats in huge numbers. And that's a big problem for Donald Trump. He needs more, particularly what they call suburban women. That's women in the suburbs, kind of moderate Republican types who may have liked Bush and other previous Republicans, Mitt Romney and so on. He needs them to win in some of these swing states. So I think the issue of abortion, it does dominate the one, on one side. It really is a big motivating factor. I mean, Trump has his own motivating factors as well, of course. And I think his base are very driven this election campaign. They see him being locked up. They see him being prosecuted. They see him being shot at. This issue again of Biden calling them garbage is another sort of deplorables moment when Hillary Clinton famously or infamously said that Trump supporters, half of them were a basket of deplorables. So both sides have got their own motivating factors for the base. And I think for the Democrats, abortion is the number one thing keeping them in this race.
We had these last week, these big rallies. I guess they're the climatic rallies for both of them. I think it was Megyn Kelly who said that actually there was a kind of, did she use the word brotastic or something? But there was a sort of a feel to Trump's one that was off-putting to women. I mean, do you think that's a real thing or not?
I don't know. I mean, I was there. There's a lot of women who goes to the Trump rallies, and I ask, one of those questions I like to ask them in my little Vox Pops is, as a woman, why do you support Trump? Because he does struggle with a lot of women. And, a lot of them are pro-life. The people who are going to these rallies, they are, hardcore Trump supporters. So, they're not, and actually, interestingly enough, now I'm thinking about it, there were some people who even said that they're pro-choice and they still support Trump because, Trump isn't saying let's ban abortion nationwide. He is essentially, and he's saying it should be up to the states, it should be up to the people in these ballot initiatives, which are what Americans call referendums. And in all of these referendums, essentially, the pro-choice side has won, even in deep red states. So, he's saying it should be up to the states. And he's also been fairly kind of light on the rhetoric on the pro-life side, which has angered a lot of actually hardcore pro-life activists in America. There's been a bit of infighting in the Republican side. So I don't think it's necessarily off-putting to women. I think there is a bit of a macho energy. I mean, Trump is a very macho guy. He's very alpha male. And, you go to there, you see the music, the sort of patriotic songs and so on. But a lot of women go to these places. Maybe it's off-putting for Megyn Kelly. Maybe it's off-putting for some women in, I'm not criticizing Megyn Kelly, but more kind of metropolitan, types. But people in the kind of Rust Belt and stuff, I don't think they're not fazed by a bit of macho energy.
No, I don't think so either. The thing about Trump, I mean, tell me if you think this is a wrong analysis, but to me, he's always struck me as being socially probably quite liberal, even if even if he's interested in it. Do you know what I mean? There's a sort of
Yeah.
sense of not really being interested in that sphere, and that what is missing as well from him, coming from the Republican side, is the religious dimension.
Yeah, I mean, he is a Christian and
Yeah.
he is, I think historically he has been socially liberal. I don't think social conservatism is the thing that gets him out of bed in the
Yeah,
morning.
no, no.
He's actually not particularly ideological, Trump. And people like to paint their own vision of what they think Trump is, depending, sort of looking at through the lens of their own ideology. If you look at his first term, again, lots of successes, I think, particularly in foreign policy. You know, his major domestic program was cutting taxes through Paul Ryan. But other than that, you know, you can look at it from a socially conservative kind of nationalist perspective and say, well, Trump didn't quite deliver the things that he was promising, particularly on, for example, the border wall. He
Yeah.
was unable to pass that through Congress, significant funding for that. And just there seemed to be endless internal squabbling and discussions about Trump himself. I think that's one of the weaknesses Trump has is, you know, he is a narcissist. He's got a big ego. I don't think anyone would deny that. Even he himself wouldn't deny that. I think he's very funny. He was talking, it was Rogan or a rally or something or an interview. I can't remember, but he was saying, "I have the best modesty. I'm the most modest person." So he's very self-aware. But I think that is a bit of a weakness that he used to just tweet about himself constantly rather than focusing on some of those issues. And one of those people who, one of those Republicans who perhaps is more focused on delivering is Ron DeSantis. And, I think look what he's done in Florida. He's banned all sorts of critical race theory. He's got rid of all of this stuff in the local government, in the state government, using sort of local Florida law to ban a lot of this pervasive things that are happening in schools, for example. Yeah. And I think that Trump, he isn't necessarily focused on that stuff as much as he perhaps should be. But again, this is the gamble Republicans and sort of more populist style people are taking this year is hopefully Trump has learned those lessons. Hopefully he can put in people who know what they're doing. And I think JD Vance is a great person to try and steer some of that along. He is ideological. He really is a believer. He's a true believer. And I think that the fact that Trump has appointed him, the fact that he and his people are around Trump is a positive sign from a conservative perspective. But again, it's difficult because Trump does pass some things that you think, wow, really, should he have done that? The prison reform stuff, trying to persuade black voters to come to his side. I think a lot of people look at that, of Republicans and conservatives, and say, well, surely we should be tougher on crime. So I think, it's a bit of a mixed bag with Trump. He's not necessarily that ideological.
You mentioned there Ron DeSantis, who I've always been impressed by, actually. But generally speaking, the Republican side, the people, the big figures, are pretty impressive on the whole. I mean, when you look at the Democrats, there appears to be nobody, Steve. I mean, maybe it's one of the reasons that obviously Kamala ended up being the nominee. But when you look at, Vivek Ramaswamy and you say JD Vance, we've got DeSantis, others, these are people that are highly plausible, aren't they, to basically, if Trump were not there, to take his place?
Absolutely, I agree. I think there are Democrats who are plausible and who are, competent. Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. A lot of Brits probably don't know too much about him, but incredibly charismatic guy. He's fairly moderate Democrat. He's very popular in Pennsylvania, which is a swing state. Trump has a good shot of winning that state, and it's vital that he does if he wants to become president. Josh Shapiro was going to, he was sort of lined up to be a front runner for Kamala Harris's vice presidential nominee, but he's Jewish. And, a lot of people were speculating that she needs to win this kind of anti-Israel vote. Yeah. And the Democrats, this is a real sort of split issue or wedge issue for the Democrats this year is, a lot of them historically have been pro-Israel. their new sort of voter base, particularly among Muslim Americans, are vehemently anti-Israel. So, and in Michigan, which is an important swing state for Kamala and for Trump, there's a significant Muslim population there. Trump is polling very well amongst Arab Americans. So Josh Shapiro is one of them. Gavin Newsom's another one. His record in California, I think, isn't great. If you're looking at things like crime, energy blackouts, people leaving the state because of high taxes, he's initiated a lot of woke policies. But he is a man who looks like a president. He looks like a sort of a casting agent in Hollywood would cast him as president. He's very charismatic. He's very suave. He did an interview with Sean Hannity a couple of years ago, and he performed very well. He did very well against Sean Hannity, the Fox News host, who assumed, I think, that he was going to destroy him, and he didn't. He also debated Ron DeSantis, and I think both of them did well in that debate. There wasn't a clear winner, but Gavin Newsom is a strong candidate. But they didn't decide to go for Gavin Newsom. They didn't decide to go for Josh Shapiro, two white men, of course. They went for Kamala Harris. And I think the people speculating is very interesting. Joe Biden was forced out by Nancy Pelosi. He was forced out by his allies, Obama and other people, Chuck Schumer, who basically said to him, you need to go. And there is speculation amongst some people in the media here, with pretty good sources around these people, who's saying, look, Biden's revenge for being pushed out was endorsing Kamala Harris. Because if you remember, what happened was Biden announced that he was resigning as the Democratic nominee for president, and he immediately endorsed Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
And that essentially meant there wasn't going to be an open primary, an open contest for the nominee. It was going to be Kamala. That was it. And I think that Biden, maybe he is playing 4D chess here. His revenge was, I'm going to choose someone who is a very weak candidate. Yes. And I think that a lot of Democrats looked at that decision, sort of cringed, because she was so unpopular before she was chosen as the candidate. She can't do an interview. She can't do unscripted moments. She can do scripted stuff. She's fine. But when it gets to interviews or, any kind of media scrutiny, she does really struggle with that. So I think his little revenge was choosing her as the Democratic candidate.
I think actually she compounded that problem by basically on CNN recently. She was asked, "What is your great weakness?" You can basically answer that with a platitude, but she, I think, chose to say, "I find it hard often, speaking, thinking on my feet." Which must have been one of the worst answers probably ever.
Well, she said weirdly, the answer was like, she was asked two questions about her weakness. And she said, some people would say it's a weakness, but I think it's a strength. I pick really intelligent people to be around me and advise me. And it was just weird. It was like, yes, this is such an obvious job interview question, and you can't even think of I work too hard.
Yes, I'm a perfectionist. Yes, yeah.
Tell me. So yeah, she's not good at doing these interviews. She's not good at doing these events, and I think that's shown throughout the campaign. Yeah. But it's so weird, Peter. It's so weird, the campaign here, because she was so unpopular as vice president, but as soon as they chose her as the presidential nominee, her approval rating shot up. And I think the reason for that was, first of all, huge relief in the Democratic Party that they won't have Joe Biden as their nominee. He was way too old. He just completely crumbled in that debate. People just knew that this was heading towards disaster for the Democrats. And they just thought, oh, thank God we've got someone younger, more charismatic and so on. But the second part of it is the media just created this absolute caricature around Kamala Harris, who didn't do any interviews for more than a month. It was all based on, again, what's been known as vibes. This idea that she's just this brat, fantastic woman full of joy. Suddenly she became this miracle, this messiah, this girl boss coming to save America, save the Democrats, defeat Donald Trump. So it was this very Soviet style switch in the press, where suddenly this woman, who for years has been a pretty poor vice president, look at her record on the border. They appointed her as so-called border czar. Tens of millions of people have come into the United States illegally. She's stumbled on the campaign, previously in the last 3 years. She's stumbled through interviews. She's made all sorts of gaffes. She's been incredibly unpopular. And then suddenly, within like a space of a week, she's become one of the most popular, people on the Democratic side. It's utterly bizarre to watch that. I can't remember an example in British politics where a similar thing has happened.
Well, it is the machine, basically, isn't it? Surely going into action. I mean, the Democrats supporting mainstream media. It sounds like a cartoon when one says that, but it's sort of undeniable, isn't it? I mean, it's all the older channels, the broadcasters, the main big newspapers, which would be the New York Times, Washington Post, pretty much in lockstep, are they not?
It is a machine, and they are in lockstep supporting Kamala. There was very little scrutiny in that early period in the campaign when she was chosen as the candidate. And you expect journalists in America, take they say they take their responsibilities, very seriously. And they're very kind of uppity, and democracy dies in darkness, and we are the defenders of the light, and we are the morally superior people coming after evil politicians and holding them to account. But that all goes away when it's a Democrat. So, I think we saw that. We saw the media machine swing, full into gear for Kamala Harris over that summer, her so-called brat summer that she had. And people don't know what I'm talking about. I'm referring to this sort of big meme in America of this pop star Charlie XCX. She did release this album anyway, but people were describing Kamala as this great sort of basically pop star figure.
Yes.
It was a machine, but on the other hand, weirdly, a lot of newspapers haven't endorsed Kamala Harris, who would previously endorse Democratic, candidates. So the Washington Post is the most famous example of this. Also, I think in Los Angeles,
the LA Times,
the LA Times, and I think in Las Vegas as well, which Nevada's a swing state, so that's kind of more important. That their major newspaper didn't endorse Kamala this time round. And I think that's because newspaper owners, proprietors, and so on can probably see where the wind is blowing. It looks like Trump has got a good chance. It's not in the bag for him, but it looks like he has a good chance of winning. So it does, although the reporters on these papers are heavily partisan in favor of Kamala Harris, the owners this time round decided not to endorse her for president, which is probably a sign that she is more likely to lose. I think that is, one of those signals, not noise, where it looks like she is a bit of a loser this time round. But who knows? It's a very, very tight election. I think a lot of Trump people feel a bit complacent. Yeah. And one of the other things I haven't mentioned is, and this is really important, is she has massively outraised Donald Trump.
Right.
She's raised like $1.1 billion in the last few months, huge amount of money. I think more than, perhaps Biden raised just a bit more than her, but a huge amount of money. And Trump hasn't raised as much as he did in 2020. I think in that same period, he raised about $400 million. And his PACs, these are political action committees, these are sort of outside, more independent groups which can raise unlimited money, super PACs, that is. Again, her PACs have raised a lot more money. Elon Musk has been spending huge amounts of money on basically keeping the Republicans in the race. Yeah. Turning Point USA, another big Republican adjacent machine, is helping Trump with the get out the vote operation. But what Kamala can do with all that money is she can pay staffers all across America to get out the vote, knock on people's doors. This is what the Democrats are very good at doing, and what they did in 2020, essentially why they won the election. And well, maybe you want to ask about this. We can talk about this as well, about how the elections actually work in America. I think it's fascinating. There's a huge difference between Britain, but it's up to you if you want to talk about that. But I think she's massively outraised Trump, which could hurt his chances.
I think also you say about people being complacent there, or the Trump supporters being complacent. I suppose one sort of, again, it's just like trying to read the man, is that apparently, it's been commented on that, when he's more, when he's relaxed and when he's more good humored, it's usually because he thinks he's winning, and that it's when he's not, that's when he gets very, very, or some would say crass in his comments. He does appear actually to be very confident. I mean, at that rally when he sort of walked in with the gold tie and the MAGA hat. I wanted to ask actually, Steve, obviously, well, we first met, when you were a journalist here, Telegraph and GB News. What do you make of British politics from where you are? I mean, do you look at it in a different way? I mean, does it look terribly provincial to you?
Do you know what? I'm still fascinated with British politics, and I'm still one thing I was thinking when I moved out here I was going to be sort of less interested, but that's not the case. It doesn't look provincial at all. I think it just looked utterly depressing.
Yes.
Looked utterly depressing. Because at least in America, look, let's say Kamala wins, you know, the Republicans still have a lot of good people, like we
Yeah.
talked about, JD Vance, Ron DeSantis,
Yeah.
these huge figures, fantastic governors who are doing great things. On the British side of things, you've got Labour for the next 5 years, at least. And then on the Conservative side of things, it looks even worse in some ways. Like you look at Kemi Badenoch, I'm sorry,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
be partisan, too partisan, but to me that's just utterly depressing.
Yeah.
Particularly when I've interviewed, Conservative Party politicians, Reform Party politicians, and there's just it doesn't seem to be that same kind of radicalism on the right in Britain that I think is required to deal with the major problems that Britain faces today, particularly on immigration. There just doesn't seem to be that radical fever in Britain on the right that there is in America. And I hope that changes over the next few years. And I think maybe someone like Robert Jenrick will change the mood. Whether we can trust the Conservatives again is another question. But will he continue in the rhetoric that he's pushing today? And I think that is important. We've got to move that Overton window in Britain, make it more acceptable to do more radical things. And I think if Trump wins, that'll help British Conservatives. Let's say that he does enact Trump's mass deportations policy, one of his major policies. As I said before, more than 10 million illegal immigrants have entered the United States under the Biden-Harris administration. Trump is pledging to deport all those people. Republicans are talking, JD Vance will do an interview and he'll talk about deporting tens of millions of people from the United States. Could you imagine, Robert Jenrick, Nigel Farage, Kemi Badenoch saying deport millions of people, or, there might be 1 million illegal immigrants in Britain. And I know that actually Robert Jenrick has made a vague comment towards that, but Nigel certainly hasn't. I've interviewed him and people have watched that, for his own reasons. I'm not necessarily saying, criticizing him, but you can look at that interview and you can just say the sort of difference in rhetoric in Britain and America is just so different. So that's part of the reason I wanted to move here, is because, or at least temporarily, I don't know, because the right here is just fascinating. It's just utterly fascinating. And it seems to be so much further along than in the UK.
Well, I mean, I know you're doing a particular job there, being a US correspondent, but a lot of people, whether it's Calvin Robinson, I remember interviewing Calvin saying that, basically he feels less alone in America in the kind of fight or in his struggle, far less alone than he would do in Britain. I mean, you mentioned there, Nigel Farage. I mean, your interview with him actually had quite an effect here, as you probably know, in his answers to some of your questions. What do you make of reform? Is that not even, is reform actually offering anything that is sufficiently radical?
I think, like I said, Britain faces a huge, huge problem with immigration. And we've seen a record period of 20, 30 years of mass immigration. That's just, you hear that all the time. Like, it's a cliche now, you hear it and you just switch off. But just look at the practical effects of that. Look how that has transformed Britain as a country, both in an economic perspective, but also crucially from a social perspective. Look what's happened to British English identity. I think it's been utterly transformed for the worse and without democratic consent. So I think for a serious party on the right, whether it's Conservatives or Reform, you have to offer a serious, radical solution to a radical change that has happened, as I say, without democratic consent. And I think people in Reform, people in the Conservatives need to think seriously about what the solution is to that problem and what the solution is that they're offering their supporters. Because Britain isn't We're not in the 1970s anymore. We're not in the 1980s. It seems to me that many British politicians on the right are obsessed with fighting previous battles.
Yeah.
Look at Boris Johnson. He did an interview recently with Harry Cole promoting his book. He was talking about the reason that he had to open up the borders to 750,000 people in 1 year, record levels of immigration, was because in the 1970s we had terrible inflation and oh, Harry Cole, you don't know about what it was like in the 70s. You're far too young, but it was just terrible. And we needed immigrants to sort out the issue of inflation. Well, I can't remember Margaret Thatcher opening the door to hundreds of thousands or even millions of people from Africa and Asia to solve the inflation crisis in the 70s. But again, it's this idea that we're reliving the Thatcherite world. We're not in that world anymore. Britain's moved on. We have major, major new problems with social cohesion, multiculturalism being a complete disaster. We don't live in that world anymore. And I think that's the problem that British Conservatives have of all parties on the right. These people live in a completely different paradigm. You know, there's that famous Napoleon quote, I'm going to completely botch it, but you can judge a man, what a man thinks by what happened in his 20s, what happened at 20. And I think that's the thing that has defined so many conservative politicians is that Thatcher world. And do you know what? Even in the early 2010s, when a lot of younger people were getting involved in politics, even myself, I was thinking, when I was a teenager, thinking about politics, it did seem to me that Thatcher was kind of like still a major motivator. I was more on the libertarian wing. I think a lot of people were in that time, thinking about these economic battles. And now I think the whole discourse paradigm, the whole of Britain has moved on from that. There need to be new solutions. And we just don't live in that world anymore. And I just really hope that that more libertarian economic, liberally economic people start to shift their rhetoric on immigration, which I think is what Robert Jemerick is doing to an extent.
I think, I certainly was there during that time, and in the 1980s with Thatcher, in my 20s, and there's no question, the sense of triumph was palpable. But, sometimes, Steve, it looks now, when I look around, as though Thatcher actually never happened, because so many things have carried on in this decline. Have to bring it to an end there, Steve. I mean, it's great to talk to you about this. I know you're going to hate this. Any self-respecting journalist does. But what do you think is going to happen on Tuesday?
I think Trump's going to win,
Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.